NFL analysts across the board are awful at talking about quarterback play in a non-sensational way. We don't know how to measure the stats that we have properly, and we usually rely on our perception of a player to guide our opinion and decide what stats we value and when. And what makes all of this even worse, what accentuates this problem, is the fact that we base so much of our perception of a quarterback and what stats we decide matter and all of that junk based on two of the dumbest things you could base it on: intangibles and win-loss record. Now look, I'm not acting as if I'm better than anybody who does this. I do it, they do it, you do it. Think about it. Why did Baker Mayfield's hype get so out of hand in the offseason? Was it because he had 14 very good games and broke the rookie touchdown record? Or was it because he re-energized the city and completely changed the franchise?
A star in the NFL is born. I mean, as simple as that. This is
often the case. It's the mania that surrounds a player that determines the perception of a player and not the tangible play on the field, which is dumb. But that's hard to control. I can't blame fans for getting carried away and lost when a young quarterback shows major potential. And I don't want that passion to go away, or else everybody just becomes boring, dry, passionless accountants who are afraid to be wrong. Getting lost and acting crazy and making wild proclamations about your team and riding with them to incredible levels, that's part of the fun. And when it's clear that you're just being a fan, see, that's fine. But when it's under the guise of some kind of objective journalism, like it is in many newspapers or at a lot of these big media companies, that's where I get sick of hearing how basic and lazy takes on specifically young quarterbacks can be. And there is one take that drives me crazy. There's one take that I will never understand why people put so much weight into it, because it does not matter. And that one take is judging your perception of a young quarterback, and more importantly, his future, on a win-loss record is the dumbest, laziest thing a sports writer of any kind on any platform can do. And yet, there are companies out here that pay millions of dollars to dudes in suits that will use a win-loss record as the end-all be-all in their conversation about a young quarterback and how well he's playing. Now, you watching this at home may have some valid questions. Who the hell am I? Do I think I'm perfect? You got things wrong in your videos before. Why should I listen to you? And why shouldn't the win-loss record count against a quarterback? I mean, Tom Brady is the GOAT, and he has a great win-loss record. Yes, there are cases where a win-loss record does matter. For a quarterback at the end of their career, a win-loss record does have significance, because over time, a quarterback gets more control over the offense, more control over the team, and the team is more of a reflection of the quarterback. But remember, this is a video about young quarterbacks, and young quarterbacks in their first or second years do not have that kind of autonomy yet with the franchise that older quarterbacks do. So acting like it does is kind of pointless. Let's use Tom Brady as an example. In his first 24 starts, he was 15-9, which is pretty good. But if we use that as a bar for a good quarterback, then we see why this number is so meaningless. Because by that measurement, Joe Flacco should have turned out just as good as Tom Brady, because Joe Flacco was also 15-9. Not sold? Baker Mayfield, whose win-loss record is a reason that people call him a bust. He has an 11-13 win-loss record through his first 24 games. So by that logic, he is worse than Brady, obviously, and Joe Flacco, not as obvious, but better than Drew Brees, who was 10-14, and Peyton Manning, who was 9-15. Do you see how this makes negative sense? How it's almost impossible to use a win-loss record as an indicator of future success for a young quarterback? Because if it was anything close to an accurate barometer on how good a young quarterback is, that means we would have to replace Tom Brady and Peyton Manning with Dak Prescott, who's 18-6 in his first 24 games, and Ben Roethlisberger, who's 20-4. Both good quarterbacks, both ain't Brady and Manning. See, attributing a win-loss record to an individual player, specifically a young individual player, is archaic because at a fundamental level, football requires the least amount from a single individual in order to win a game than most any other sport. If you put LeBron James right now on a JV high school basketball team, you have the best high school basketball team in the country. If you put Garrett Cole on the mound in a high school baseball game, you will have a shutout. But if you put Patrick Mahomes on a terrible high school team, you have a bunch of dudes looking at balls they do not have the ability to catch nor block for. For a young quarterback to be great, he needs to, at the very least, have competence at every level. You don't need to be great at every level. You don't need to be good at every level. You just need to have competence at every level. You need a competent play call from your coaching staff, a competent pass block from your offensive line, a competent route to be ran, and a competent catch by your wide receiver. And yes, when an elite quarterback is surrounded with competence at the very least, he makes an absolute huge difference. But see, nobody overcomes complete incompetence in the NFL. And what are most early round quarterbacks surrounded with? Incompetence. And see, being on a roster with competence at every level is rare. So in most cases, a win-loss record has nothing to do with a young quarterback's play because most young quarterbacks are not dealing with the same level of competence at every level. And the thing that boggles me when we talk about win-loss record and attributing this to young quarterbacks is that there are people on the field that a win-loss record is completely reflective of. And that is the head coach and the general manager. Because making sure everybody is competent is literally their job. Quarterbacks don't draft players. They don't sign free agents. They don't design playbooks. They don't coach the offensive lines. They don't make play calls. So why in the world should they be judged by a stat that measures precisely those things? Especially when there are stats like QBR and passer rating that exist that are way more accurate barometers of quarterback play than win-loss record. But it never fails. A young quarterback could have statistically an identical stretch of games throughout the season. But if there are W's next to it, then it's all positives. But if there are L's next to it, then it becomes a question of whether that player should be replaced. But that's not the only thing we do that's terrible when it comes to young quarterbacks. Talk about quarterbacks, we tend to bring stats that support our argument without weighing the full context behind that number. We attribute significance to things that don't exist, like quarterback duels. By the way, that is one of the most artificial talking points of all time. Because how do two quarterbacks duel when they never are on the field at the same time, go head to head, or even play against the same defenses? I could tell you that Carson Wentz played much better than Patrick Mahomes in week 13 because Wentz threw for 310 yards and 3 touchdowns last week, while Mahomes only threw for 175 and 1 touchdown. But that'd be silly, because the context of those numbers is that Wentz put up those numbers in a loss to the Dolphins, and Mahomes did it in a 40-9 drubbing of the Raiders. See, numbers don't make a point. They can only be used to support a point, because stats require proper context in order to carry any real meaning in an argument. It's why it's dumb to reduce Lamar Jackson down to his passing numbers, or calling a young quarterback a bust for having an average win-loss record. But instead, some like to ignore context so they can point at one stat as the end-all be-all for their argument because they don't want to do actual research. And these are the things that go into how a quarterback is perceived. And these things actually do matter. It affects how much these players get paid. It affects how many opportunities are they going to be given. The media perception of a quarterback is so important and so overvalued that it can actually get a quarterback into the Hall of Fame, while it can run a quarterback who's still developing out of town and out of chances before he ever had a real opportunity to develop. A lot of what we use to predict quarterback play is complete fluff. There is no way to predict quarterback play. It's unpredictable. And when anybody tells you they know how to predict who's going to be the next quarterback, they're guessing. They're lying. Nobody knows. There are people who are paid tens of millions of dollars who have no clue. There are people in the NFL who have spent years as a franchise quarterback themselves, but can't figure out for the life of them how to find one. Nobody knows this recipe. And pretending that anybody has the answer or can point at any stat that indicates anything other than just randomness is disingenuous. I'm not asking that people talk about quarterback play in this scientific way. I'm just asking that we be honest about our inability to predict quarterback play, because when it comes to this, we are all guessing and we all don't know what we're talking about. And instead, all we're doing is projecting our biases and things that have no actual bearing on quarterback play as absolute truth and actually costing people jobs because of it. We are all human beings trying to predict something that nobody knows how to predict. Nobody expects everybody to be right all the time, and if they do, that's ridiculous. It's better that people be honest about what they are biased for and against, instead of parading around meaningless, contextless stats as objective fact, which has created a culture where instead of people having conversations about what could or might be right and being open to different ideas and different interpretations of what might be a decent indicator of good quarterback play, instead of that, we live in a culture where people are terrified to be wrong, terrified to make a mistake, and just want to be right, which leads to a ton of people jumping on whatever hype or hate train that passes them by. And that is what I hate about sports talk.